Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. President Trump is declaring victory after being acquitted in his impeachment trial. He was greeted with applause during a White House address Thursday. The president called it a day of celebration, but he also went on the attack.
We've been going through this now for over 3 years. It was evil, it was corrupt, it was dirty cops, it was leakers and liars. And this should never, ever happen to another president, ever. I don't know that other presidents would have been able to take it. Some people said no, they wouldn't have.
Mr. Trump was acquitted Wednesday on 2 articles, abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. The president says the trial harmed the country. Here's what he said Thursday morning at the National Prayer Breakfast.
My family, our great country, and your president have been put through a terrible ordeal by some very dishonest and corrupt people. They have done everything possible to destroy us, and by so doing, very badly hurt our nation.
I want to bring in Major Garrett, Jill Colvin, and Siobhan Hughes. Major is our CBS News chief Washington correspondent. Jill is a White House reporter for the Associated Press. And Siobhan is a congressional reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Welcome to all of you. Major, we heard the president call the process corrupt. Is this the same message and tone that we expect the president to take on the campaign trail, or is he ready to move past this?
There's no indication he's ready to move past this, and I have a show on CBSN tomorrow called The Takeout. Steve Scalise, the #2 House Republican, is on the show. I asked him when we taped the show earlier this week, you know, now that Mueller investigation is over and impeachment is over, who does Donald Trump have to fight with anymore? That's what keeps him going. Those are his words, not mine. Steve Scalise said, oh, he's got the campaign ahead of him, and he's going to revisit all these things, and he's going to make what's happened to him an issue in the presidential campaign. So you can be sure, maybe not half the time, but a good and sizable percentage of the time, these grievances deeply embedded in the president's psyche will be repeated as part of his campaign message. And to vindicate what he's done as president, he will tell his supporters, you have got to reelect me to end what's happened to me, meaning the president, and by indirection to you who supported me. So if you want to end these so-called witch hunts, you've got to reelect me. These things will be very closely aligned.
Well, for some perspective, I want to play some of Bill Clinton's acquittal speech from 1999 with some of today's from President Trump. Let's listen to that.
Now that the Senate has fulfilled its constitutional responsibility, bringing this process to a conclusion, I want to say again to the American people how profoundly sorry I am for what I said and did to trigger these events and the great burden they have imposed on the Congress and on the American people.
But a tremendous thing was done over the last number of months, but really if you go back to it over the last number of years, we had the witch hunt. It started from the day we came down the elevator, myself and our future First Lady who's with us right now. Thank you, Melania.
I also am humbled and very grateful for the support and the prayers I have received from millions of Americans over this past year. Now I ask all Americans, and I hope all Americans, here in Washington and throughout our land, will rededicate ourselves to the work of serving our nation and building our future together.
We've been going through this now for over 3 years. It was evil, it was corrupt, it was dirty cops, it was leakers and liars. And this should never, ever happen to another president, ever.
Major, how do the two speeches compare?
Well, in so many ways, they are contrasts in the particular president's style, approach, and sense of political danger. Bill Clinton, I covered that entire process, lied to the American people, lied to his cabinet, lied to his wife, said everything accused or alleged about his extramarital affair with Monica Lewinsky was a lie. He had to admit that was true, and that he misused his office, at least in the construct of a power relationship with a White House intern. And he had to publicly account for that aggressive lie he told everyone. And his approach was to be contrite from that moment forward, contrite about what he did, contrite about the lie, contrite about the damage he did to his family and to his reputation as a truth teller as an American president. And then he had to lay himself before Congress, ask them to censure him, not impeach him. The Republican Congress ignored that plea to be censured and impeached him. And then he said, the Senate's fulfilled its duty. I'm still sorry, and let's try to move on in a constructive way. President Trump, in the Ukraine situation, never acknowledged that he did anything wrong, and in the aftermath of his acquittal, now accuses any Republican who suggests otherwise of either disloyalty to their religion, phony religious faith, phony conscience, an absolute scorched earth approach to anyone who does not walk in lockstep with him on this and every other matter. There was a gesture the president had at the very beginning of this. As people rose to applaud him, he applauded them. That's what this president does. He applauds people who applaud him.
All right, Major Garrett, I know you have to get going. Thanks so much for joining us. But let's continue this conversation, Jill and Siobhan. President Trump continued his attacks on Nancy Pelosi today, calling her a horrible person. And you'll recall, of course, earlier this week at the State of the Union, Speaker Pelosi ripped up her copy of the president's speech. Well, here's what the House Speaker had to say at a news conference earlier when asked if she would invite the president to give the State of the Union next year.
Well, next year, we will have a new president of the United States. That is an absolute imperative for our country, for our Constitution, for the land that we love from sea to shining sea, which he degrades almost every day, but several times a week.
So, Siobhan, when you see that and you hear that tone in the speaker, is there any sense that this relationship between Nancy Pelosi and President Trump can be salvaged in any way?
We are at such a remarkable moment because not only is that relationship strained, to use Nancy Pelosi's words today, which I think was an understatement of where things stand, but both parties, Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi, are open about how they feel about each other. Normally in Congress, people tend to publicly paper over their differences. We only find out about them through leaks. And the other interesting thing is that after moments of such political tension, you normally see leaders step back from the brink, say, let's pause, let's recalibrate, let's find a way to work together. You are not seeing that right now. You played the clip of Donald Trump calling Nancy Pelosi a horrible person. Nancy Pelosi herself, in her press conference today, absolutely owned the actions that she took during the State of the Union when she ripped up Donald Trump's speech. She made clear that this is going to be out-and-out confrontation from here on in. Her aim is to call him on every single one of the what she has not labeled lies but mistruths that he tells. It's really a troubling and unbelievable moment in political life right now.
You know, it's hard to imagine how things might move forward in Washington. Let's talk about Senator Mitt Romney. He was the only Republican to vote guilty on abuse of power. President Trump has continued to attack Romney and bring up his religion. Let's listen to the president earlier.
I had some that said, well, I wish he didn't make the call, and that's okay. If they need that, it's incorrect. It's totally incorrect. And then you have some that used religion as a crutch. They never used it before. An article written today, never heard him use it before. But today, you know, it's one of those things. But, you know, it's a failed presidential candidate, so things can happen when you fail so badly running for president.
Jill, what kind of response have those specific kinds of attacks on Mitt Romney from the president gotten? Because we heard a lot of cheering in the East Room, but there didn't appear to be much cheering in those moments.
No, certainly not. And, you know, the president first sort of made that same attack in a more veiled fashion without actually mentioning Senator Romney by name. But he did a similar line of attack this morning at the National Prayer Breakfast, which is typically, you know, this bipartisan event. You've got members from both parties coming together on the same stage, supposed to be there for the same cause. And Trump using that occasion to criticize Mitt Romney for using his faith as justification for choosing to vote in favor of one of those articles of impeachment. Look, these men have a long, strained relationship. I can't imagine that there are many people who are not aware of that contrast between the two of them, but the president today in his East Room remarks really went after Romney, predicting that he would lose his Senate seat in his next election. And you heard Romney, even when he was making his announcement in the interviews he did, really talking about how he understood the political risks here. Look, this is a party that has become the party of Donald Trump, and the president believes, and the president has evidence to show, that there are serious consequences for those who cross him.
Siobhan, I wonder, are vulnerable Senate Republicans concerned at all about how impeachment may impact their campaigns this year?
Well, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell yesterday projected an air of absolute lack of concern. He said that every single vulnerable Senate Republican, every one of them, was better off now than before impeachment started. If that's the case, Democrats certainly don't think it. Susan Collins is facing a pretty rough attack ad right now from her likely Democratic challenger, Sarah Gideon from Maine, who is playing the clip of the Susan Collins interview with CBS, in which she said she thinks Donald Trump has learned its lesson, cutting that with remarks from Donald Trump saying his July 25th call was absolutely perfect. He had done nothing wrong. And so while Susan Collins is unlikely to say that she is at risk after her impeachment vote, it seems pretty clear that there is a cloud on the horizon for at least her, if not some of the others.
And Siobhan, the House is weighing whether or not to continue further its investigations into the president. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff was asked about that last night on MSNBC, particularly regarding John Bolton. Let's listen to some of that.
We did approach John Bolton's counsel, asked if Mr. Bolton would be willing to submit an affidavit under oath describing what he observed in terms of the president's Ukraine misconduct. And he refused. So for whatever reason, he apparently was willing to testify before the Senate. But apart from that, seems intent on saving it for his book. He'll have to answer for that. But at this point, we have not made a decision about whether or not to move forward with a subpoena, but it's certainly something that we will be discussing.
Siobhan, what do we know about potential further investigations into the president by House Democrats?
It seems to be very much up in the air right now. You heard Adam Schiff say that they would be discussing the next step, so that's not locking in a subpoena for John Bolton. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi today was asked about a subpoena for John Bolton at her press conference. She didn't answer that specifically and was very non-committal about future investigations. She said that Democrats would continue to do their general oversight. She cited a number of court cases that are in the pipeline, including 3 pertaining to Donald Trump's financial records that go before the Supreme Court in March for oral arguments. But she said, as for more, we'll see. We don't have any plans to do that right now. So this does not seem to be a Democratic Party that at the moment, with a unified voice, is eager to prosecute more cases.
Even so, Jill, I wonder, is the White House concerned about further investigations?
You know, at this point, at this very moment today, this is a White House that is in celebration mode. You know, you've got the president up there at every occasion, declaring victory, physically holding up the headlines of the front pages of newspapers, proclaiming his acquittal. You've got staffers who've been spending their nights at the Trump Hotel, really, celebrating, trying to figure out how to pivot forward here as the 2020 election race really gets underway. That said, obviously, Democrats are continuing to want to potentially subpoena John Bolton. You also had the president today, though, continuing to go after Hunter Biden, suggesting that potentially that is an avenue that this White House and its allies in Congress might want to continue to pursue. And so it doesn't sound like any of these fundamental arguments or any of these investigative strands are going away just because of the impeachment vote, because both sides feel like they've got something to gain politically from hammering these issues.
All right, Jill Colvin and Siobhan Hughes, thank you both very much.